All right, welcome to today's video, everyone. Today, I wanted to talk about late cancellations. How do you come up with a late cancellation policy? What should it be? And more importantly, like what is underneath a late cancellation policy, right? We don't just want to make something up and then go with it, but there's like a whole way of thinking about late cancellation policies, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. We're not going to play any games here. We're just going to get right into it. And I don't know. This is a brand new look. My gosh, sorry about that. I don't know what's going on there. You're going to see me looking all over the place. I apologize in advance. I've got a camera here. I've got my computer here. I got my screen here. Another camera up there, and I'm trying this whole new method of filming. Now, I know I've said that before. This is going to take a little while to dial in, so please just forgive me for looking around everywhere. I'm focusing on all sorts of different screens here, but let's just dive into this. I don't want to waste any time here. We all have things to do, right? All right, so there we go. All right, cool. So these are just some raw notes I was taking in regards to late cancellation policy, and I'm really just going to invite you into these notes here. Nothing fancy. But the first thing we want to kind of think about is developing a policy, okay? And now when we develop a policy, we don't want to just make it up, okay? Oh, I've heard other therapists have late cancellation policies. I'm going to do that too. First off, you want to think about why. Like, why are you going to have a late cancellation policy? It might be an obvious question with an obvious answer, but we still need to answer that question personally for ourselves, right? And so most of us are going to have a late cancellation policy so that we don't end up missing out on income due to people canceling, right? So for example, if you have 20 people scheduled in a week and 15 cancel, now this is preposterous. This usually doesn't happen, but then your income is going to dip significantly, and most people cannot afford to have their income dip significantly. And there are weeks where there's a lot of late cancellations and there's a lot of whatever it might be. And as therapists, we do need to have a way to kind of keep the income as consistent as possible. And one way we do this is through late cancellation policies. All right. Now, they can be different for everyone. And so I'm not here to tell you the right way to make the right type of cancellation policy. This has to be decided on by you for your own kind of personal preferences. And that's what we're going to talk about. All right. But just think about why. Why are you doing it? Why do you have a late cancellation policy? Right. So that's the first thing. And then the next thing is, we have to kind of think about what makes sense for us, what makes sense for you as the provider. Now, what I'm talking about here in terms of making sense is this is how we decide what the policy is going to be, right? So how much is the late cancellation policy going to be, and how many hours in advance does someone need to cancel within to not be charged a late cancellation fee, right? I guess if we back up a little bit, I'm assuming people know what we're talking about when we talk about late cancellations. We're basically talking about a fee that is incurred when someone cancels an appointment without enough notice. So for example, some people have a 24-hour policy. So if a client cancels is it less than? I always get them. I'm so bad with these words. If a client cancels with less than 24 hours, then there's a cancellation fee, right? So let's say that they have an appointment at 3 p.m., they cancel at 1 p.m. that same day, they're going to incur a fee. Like that would be an example of a late cancellation policy. So in order to determine the hour, right? So like what the window is for a late cancellation and also the amount, we have to think about what makes sense for us. Now, the first thing we want to think about, if we think about how long, and this is not on the notes, but how long in advance does someone need to give you so that they don't get a late cancellation fee? You have to think about how quickly can you fill a slot. Now, for some people, they might be able to, fill an empty slot within 24 hours. Maybe they have a wait list, maybe they have a really large caseload, and people are waiting for cancellations. So if you can fill a slot within 24 hours without much problem, I don't see why you wouldn't make the time 24 hours, right? But let's say you're a smaller practice or a practice that doesn't have tons of people waiting for cancellations to occur where you can fill the slot. Maybe it's a 48-hour window, right? And maybe that's what it takes for you to fill the slot up. But when you think about the length of time, you want to think about how long it might take you to fill an empty slot and kind of go from there. All right. And then the next thing we have to kind of think about is, well, how much is the fee going to be? And we want to think about this, I guess, from two perspectives. We want to think about, again, what makes sense for you, but you also want to think about what makes sense for clients. And so let's just break that down a bit. What makes sense for you is, you want to think about how much is your hourly rate when you do see a client, right? And so you don't want to have a cancellation policy that is like just a fraction of that, because then again, we get a huge dip in the income. You also don't want to make the hourly fee like above that, because that would be nonsensical, not fair, and probably unethical, right? So you want to think about what your hourly rate is, what makes sense in terms of a cancellation fee, right? Most people are going to make the cancellation fee somewhere kind of in the ballpark of the hourly rate. Okay, that's usually what I see. Now, again, you see people going below and not above. I don't see people doing that, because I'm not sure about that one. But you usually see people like right at the hourly rate or a little bit below. And then you want to think about what makes sense for clients. And when I say that, I'm really meaning like to take an inventory of like what's the standard in your area, right? So if you do like just a survey of, I don't know, a bunch of therapists in New York, and you kind of see what are their cancellation policies, you want to fall within the realm of you kind of want to be in the mix, right? If you know what I mean, right? So let's say you do the survey and you see the average cancellation fee is, $80, and, people are usually doing 24 to 48 hours. You want to be somewhere in there, right? You don't want to be too high, too low. You don't want to be like 72 hours or 10 hours, right? So you want to kind of be within the realm of like what's happening in your market. That might take a little bit of research. So that's kind of how you develop the policy. And then the other thing I wanted to mention about that is, if you do want to incorporate flexibility, so if you want to waive the first one, or you want to have like a policy where, if people are sick, or you don't have a cancellation fee, or there's hardship, whatever it might be, if you're thinking you want to be flexible, make sure you incorporate that into the initial policy. The problem people run into is they set a policy, a late cancellation, and then all of a sudden people are canceling, and there's all these things they didn't expect. So maybe someone canceled because they got COVID, or someone canceled because a family member passed away, right? And they're kind of thinking, oh, what do I do? Do I charge the fee? Do I not? And then they end up going case by case. Now, in some regard, we can't help that. We're going to have to kind of learn on the fly, because we're not going to be able to kind of, predict every situation we're going to find ourselves in. But what you should do is kind of think about what types of scenarios might you encounter, right? Are you going to encounter people who get sick the day of? Are you going to encounter people, of course, you're going to encounter that, right? Or people who kind of, there's death in the family. Whatever it might be that might cause late cancellations, if you want to be flexible around those things, incorporate that into your initial policy as best as you can. All right. That's one thing that will help you stay consistent. I think that's one of the problems when it comes to late cancellations, is it's really hard to stay consistent. And that's because there's all sorts of circumstances that we didn't plan for. All right. So those are three things that I would encourage you to think about when it comes to developing a late cancellation policy. Even if you don't have a late cancellation policy, meaning you're not going to charge people for late cancellations, that should be a policy. All right. So everyone should be developing a policy around this. And this is how I would think about it. All right. These are kind of the steps I would take. Now we're going through this in detail and talking about this, it looks like, for about 8 minutes. It might not take that long to come up with the policy, but at least you've thought through these things. Okay. And then next, the other two items I wanted to mention, which I think are really helpful, and perhaps you're already doing it, but is transparency and consistency. Now, when I talk about transparency, we want to be totally upfront and totally honest and transparent about our late cancellation fee with any prospective client. And I think that's probably what most therapists do. That is part of our job. It's the informed consent, right? Everyone needs to know what we're doing and the policies and procedures. And this is just a reminder that when it comes to late cancellation, if you decide to change it or there's nuanced details with it, make sure a prospective client knows. And rather than just having it incorporated into your intake packet, make it a point to talk about it before it ever happens. right? So when a client's on the initial call or when you're doing the intake, whatever it might be, take a minute just to say, hey, you might have reviewed this already, but I just want to review the late cancellation policy in advance, just in case that happens. So you're fully aware, give them time to ask questions. Maybe they have concerns about it, whatever it might be, but be transparent early on, and don't just be transparent within the packet, the intake packet, hoping they read it. Talk about it. I think this is a really important thing. That way, we already have a foundation, right, when it comes to late cancellations, and that I find to be really, really helpful. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to encourage people is to be really consistent. Now, again, we have to be flexible in this regard. That's always the caveat, right? People are going to go through circumstances that might require you to waive the fee, whatever it might be. But to the best of your abilities, be as consistent as possible, and not just consistent in the sense that, we have the policy and we stick to it, but also sticking to it across your entire caseload, or if you have a group practice, your whole kind of caseload, right? What you don't want to end up doing is creating different policies based on everyone's unique circumstances as best as we can, right? We definitely don't want that where, this client said this, so I changed the policy for them, and this client said this. We don't want that. That's not helpful. That's very confusing. That gets people into some issues. Be consistent across your entire practice, whether you're a solo provider or a group practice. Be consistent in that regard. Okay. Those are just some of my thoughts. I was thinking about this video literally 2 minutes before I pushed record. So these are some of my thoughts about late cancellation policies. This is how I think about it, how I've been thinking about it. I think that this would be helpful for you to know kind of a bit about the kind of like, the underlying kind of like thought behind a late cancellation policy. I hope this was helpful for you. If you have additional questions, feel free to send me an email. I also facilitate a consultation group of sorts. It's an online community where you can ask questions. I respond to every single one personally. I'll leave a link to that down below in the description if you want to check that out. But I'm always posting videos. I've been posting a video every day for like the last month or so. And I plan to continue to do that. Anyway, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video.